I am a chaplain, a spiritual care counselor, and my job is to help support people connect to their own inner strength and hope, and help them navigate the rocky road of going through cancer, facing a healthcare crisis. Spirituality is a universal experience of part of being human, and spiritual care helps connect people with the hero within, to use the crisis to deepen their humanity and to amplify their love, as well as to develop a connection to a wider sense of being, and generally we call that spirituality. So as you provide spiritual care, it improves communication between patient and family. It processes the hidden emotional homework that's been hiding down inside, and it helps people relax into their own experience, discovering the better part of themselves. I've had cancer 4 times. I'm very lucky to be here. And it's wired me with an intuitive empathy with what it's like to go through cancer. I know what it is like to live every day aware that it could be your last. That can help me be a guide, helping them navigate the really scary road ahead and work with their fears as well as the reality, and that they can connect to a nobility and a dignity and an ability to do the things that they never thought they could, to go to the places that scare them and not be overcome. When you're facing an ultimate diagnosis and a poor prognosis, the number 1 concern is your loved ones. The number 2 concern is suffering. The third is unfinished business, and we're not talking about the taxes here. We're talking about the unfinished love story. And the fourth one is finally mortality. That moves up to number 1 as it approaches, but it does so in a way that is supported by love, even as you feel you are dissolving in the experience. Chaplains can be there at the end of life and help make this not just a good death, one in which pain is well managed, but one in which hearts are connected and people are authentic, and you're working compassionately and tenderly with the unspoken words. I remember one case. Jerry and Karen were a young couple, and cancer had interrupted their lives so quickly when he got the diagnosis, and it caused him to slide quickly into the chaos of cancer. I went to them at the last stage, and she looked up at me and she said, his main concern was for me. He was lying unconscious in the intensive care unit, and they hadn't gotten married in a formal ceremony yet. And she said that he delayed that as long as possible because he wanted to recover and have a good wedding with a beautiful dress and all the fixins. And it was not to be. And she shook her head and she said, oh, I just wish we could get married. I said, well, why don't we? You are husband and wife in God's eyes. Let's say it out loud and exchange the vows. She held his hand, and I said to her, do you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, richer for poor until death parts you? Oh yes, she said. And she cried. And I said to him, the same vows, repeat after me, and he did so from the beating of his heart, and she placed her ear upon his heart and heard it. And I turned to her parents and I said, do you support this couple in their union? And they cried and smiled and said, you bet we do. By the power vested in me, declare you are husband and wife. You may kiss your groom. But she couldn't because she was short and the bed was raised. So she had to grab a stool and climb to her love and kiss his cheek and his lips. And as she did so, his breath faded. Spiritual needs are important. This was a survey done at the Mayo Clinic. What do people want from a chaplain? Well, to remind them of God's care and presence is paramount. And that comes out first in that question, why me? And that is not a question looking for an answer. that is a statement that reveals fear and anxiety and how life has come off the rails and you don't feel safe anymore. We have to ask that question, but move fairly quickly from why me to a better one, which is, what am I going to do with this? How am I going to use the crisis? Because what we want is to feel safe. And what we discover is that when you are deeply loved, you feel safe. And when you love deeply, you feel courage, clarity. It is a glimpse into the deepest aspect of our spiritual nature and of our humanity. Grief is the price you pay for love. We don't want to stop that. We want to help it be processed. And it's different than depression. Grief is an important part of the spiritual journey. The family goes through anticipatory grief, while the patient goes through preparatory grief. The family and loved ones prepare to say goodbye to one person, but they prepare to say goodbye to everything and everyone. The depth of that is too much to be processed all at once or cognitively. It is done laterally through the heart, sideways through the stumbling words, and silently through the touch of a hand and the expression on the face, more than the content of the words. Many of the people I work with who have reached that stage, the end of life, actually do so with a secret equanimity that is mingled with the sorrow and the desire to stay here. It is because their consciousness has actually been shifting and preparing for this from the moment of diagnosis. Even with a treatable cancer, many think about death and the end. And when they reach that point, there is some quality, some aspect of most people which is actually open to it. Michael was terrified of it. He had glioblastoma, and on top of the treatment, which required this mask to affix his head to the table so it wouldn't move and the beam would accurately hit the tumor, he was claustrophobic, so he did not want to wear the mask. How could he overcome this? How could he go through treatment fighting for his family? He wanted to go for the radiation treatment, which had no guarantee, but first he had to learn how to wear that mask. So I was called down, a chaplain. How can I help him? Well, first by listening to his story, just trying to get to know him. And what I learned was he loved movies. He loved science fiction movies. I asked, who's the hero for you? He said, well, it's Luke Skywalker, of course. I want to be Luke Skywalker. I said, perhaps you are. Imagine that your lightsaber is the laser beam and your opponent is the tumor and the force is your consciousness. Suddenly, he was connected to the hero within. He was animated to experiment, and through mindfulness and rehearsing with me, he quickly connected to that warrior who was able to go into treatment with profound excitement and equanimity. And he went through it with no anxiety, and it bought him a year and a half more of life, in which he celebrated it richly with his dog and his parents and his friends, and it was beautiful. Having faith is good for you. It's been shown to improve health outcomes, decrease need for opioids. A person with a spiritual balance is able to face suffering with less distress. They live longer, they have better coping skills, decreased anxiety, depression, or desire to end their life. It doesn't mean that they are willing to go through more treatment that would cause unreasonable suffering, but they are able to see their health trajectory with balance. I enjoyed visiting with Dr. Alistair Cunningham, who is at Sunnybrook Hospital, and he's been for 30 years running the Healing Journey program, and it explores psychosocial and spiritual support and how it impacts on life. And generally, his studies show that it buys you another 2 years at least. This was a study done of people who had incurable metastatic cancer, and intentional, disciplined spiritual engagement improved quality of life and length of life. I tried to apply that as well to a few patients here using the creative arts. So Laura was a painter whose adventure around the world on a tall ship was interrupted by a diagnosis of acute leukemia. Her healing was slow after the transplant, and she just couldn't get her numbers, her neutrophil counts and blood counts up. So I said, I want you to paint your healing. You're a painter. Let's connect into the wisdom of your spirit. Just let it flow from you. And this is what came from her soul. It's kind of a Garden of Eden image. And look at that massive tree. It's walking upon the earth, and it's filled with this energy swirling. Daffodils and echinacea healing flowers and butterflies, symbols of transformation. This was her journey. She didn't need to understand it. She needed to express it and process it. And when she did this, her count suddenly climbed. Are we fully present in the moment? Very rarely, very sporadically. Spiritual practice means being fully present in this moment and opening up to all of the mess that is within us, with no judgment or criticism, in fact, with compassion. Mindfulness is not about tuning out, it's about tuning in, listening to the noise within your heart and your head and letting it flow without editing or judging it or shutting it down. That's hard when we spend so much energy avoiding ourselves. But it's good for you. In fact, this study and many others show it rewires your brain literally. The anterior cingulate cortex becomes denser with neurons, and this area links the amygdala to the higher brain functions and improves self-regulation, compassion, equanimity, ability to deal with crisis, adaptability, general well-being. Spiritual care practitioners have the unique privilege of hearing from patients mystical experiences which are all too common. I have heard a mystical experience every month for the past 20 years. Something is going on. How common are they? This excellent study in The Lancet showed that 18% from heart attack survivors had them, and this study, retrospective and prospective of gerontology, showed 1/2 to 3/4 of the dying report deathbed visions. So this means that they see the spirit of a deceased relative appear in the room at the foot of the bed or beside them. And there's communication, though not verbal this way, consciousness to consciousness, or simply that quality of presence and love. Spiritual intervention happens all the time, but it's so subtle and it looks so ordinary, and only occasionally does it peek through with wonder and that kind of energy. It's been happening for a long time. Dr. Shushan has studied spiritual experience from the beginning of recorded history, and he's compared the journeys to the afterlife, near-death experiences, from the most separated geographic and chronological regions of the world, and looking at the afterlife mythologies and the stories of the people who visit the other side and come back. And what he found was not surprising. This is a universal phenomenon. It's not held to any one tradition or time period, culture, or language. It has the highest degree of similarities at the highest level. So you leave your body, you go to another realm, you encounter other beings, you encounter a being of absolute authority and love. Your life sometime is evaluated and you're returned to earth. As it gets down to the culture and then to the individual, it all becomes more specific. All of it is infused with this love and connection and awareness and the wider state of consciousness from which this reality emerges. This is a contemporary language for ancient religious teachings, and one I find people are excited about and animated by, and one I try to express in the book. It weaves my 4 rounds with cancer, with patient stories of cancer, and then sections that help you work with grief and love and forgiveness and authenticity, finally arriving at that ultimate question, what is consciousness? And does it continue when the body ends? Near-death experiences are among the most common and under-researched phenomenon of what it is to be human. Death is a comma, not a period. When we provide spiritual care in a healthcare crisis, we don't need to go metaphysical though. We focus on the love and the simple steps of facing the next step. How do you climb a mountain? One step at a time. My hope is that this book will meet the tide of cancer that is flooding our way. When I started, it was 1 in 4 people will get cancer, and now it is almost 1 in 2. By the time a person reaches 70 or 80, odds are you will either be facing cancer or supporting someone who is. I wrestle with the big questions. Why me? Why did this happen? As well as what am I going to do with this? How am I going to use this crisis to evolve in love, to actually amplify my spirit, heal my relationships, as well as improve my prognosis and quality of life? It's impacted thousands of people. The feedback, especially from the patients, affirms its accuracy to their experience and the hope that it transmits. It awakens them to their best self, helps them talk to their families, and move wisely through the trajectory of care, the bumpy road ahead.